Okay, everybody, thanks for tuning in this week. I'm Kirk Kilgrave. This is the Kilgrave Corner, and this week I have a special guest with me. He's someone that has been around for a while. He's written over, I think, over 50 books by now.
Yep.
But I've been actually accumulating his books over the past number of years, ever since I saw the Haunted Forest tour, I think it was.
Yep.
It's an awesome book cover, and I thought I just have to have that. And I just kept seeing his books around. So I think I have now 10 of them. But it was finally last year when I read his book, Allison, that it really just kind of blew me away because, here's a supernatural thriller more than anything, but with a lot of action. And one of the things that I love in my horror is, constant, continual motion of the plot and characters. Usually in a lot of horror, it seems that I've read, it's all, not all, but there's a lot of atmosphere and a lot of environment, what's going on in the background. Whereas Jeff does the stuff that I love the best, which is just page turning thrills. And the one of the things that I loved about it was that I found myself laughing out loud at 11:30 at night when my wife is sleeping in the same room. So I just had to reach out to Jeff and say, how did you come up with this book? And so we have him here today. Jeff, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So how did you come up with this idea of having and I should probably show the cover because I love it. That's, like I said, one of the things that attracted me most to this book. And there we are, Allison. It looks like it reminds me of one of the books that Grady Hendrix has in his book Paperbacks from Hell, where
Yeah.
it's books from the 80s. Oh, you were going to say
My
something.
wife, Lynn Hanson, did the cover. She's done almost all my covers. She's done covers for lots of different people. And she spent a lot of time studying Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell to get the cover
Awesome.
for Allison down. So the font, the correct font was done by hand. That's not a
Wow.
pre-purchased font. That is something she did on paper and then photographed and then transformed into the cover. So
So
she
I
did
got
it.
it right on. Like I said,
Yep.
I saw it and I was like, this looks awesome. I have to find out what this is. And I was like, of course it's him. So yeah,
Yeah,
so
she
go.
she toyed with the idea of sort of making wrinkles or something in the cover to make it look like an old paperback, but I vetoed that. I thought it was going a little bit too far with the Paperbacks from Hell. But yeah, there was very, very blatant Paperbacks from Hell influence on that cover.
Awesome. So, one of the things that's kind of fascinating in this book is Allison is this female who can hurt people with her feelings, basically, and her mind when she triggers her feelings. I'm not going to go more into it, but she does have sort of a love interest in the book, and the character, that man is you're sort of led to believe that he's sort of geeky. But as time went on, I just realized that he's just more sincere and just a really nice guy. He's really not a geek. He's just kind of lonely. And it's strange because you have this really powerful woman and this man who's just a regular dude, regular nice guy, and they click for some reason. Can you go a little bit more into background on that?
Really, that was just from I wanted the characters to be really likable. And Allison, her power is that she can break your bones, basically. The premise of the character and sort of the story was, what if Carrie White from the Stephen King's book lived to be middle-aged and was sort of living in isolation? Because the sad part of her is that she can't be around people because
Yeah.
it's triggered by emotion. So she can't, at the beginning of the story, control it. So it's not if she gets angry, she breaks your bones. If she's too happy, she breaks your bones.
Oh, okay.
So it's the intensity of emotion, which means that if she goes out to dinner with friends and they're just laughing so hard that their ribs hurt, she could break their ribs. So that was kind of the tragic backstory of the characters, that she can't have fun either. It's not just, oh, you wouldn't like her when she's angry, you wouldn't like her when she's happy either. So she's basically sort of living in isolation. And so that hopefully is what made her likable. And then I added the element that she's never actually killed an animal, but she doesn't know that she wouldn't kill an animal. So she only adopts pets that are in the late stages of life.
Hmm.
So it's like, well, I could hurt the dog. I never have, but I could, and I would would kill me if I hurt a dog. So I'm going to get a 11-year-old dog. And then if I do it, at least I gave it its final couple years a good life. And so, which means that she's always losing pets. So she has a very, very sad life, which that's all set up at the beginning of the book to make her likable when she becomes a fairly scary character, because if you mess with her, she's not going to hesitate to hurt you. She's
Yeah.
not, she is not anti-violence when she's in danger.
Yeah.
And as the book goes on, she gets sort of scarier and scarier.
Yeah.
And
But I
then
mean, oh, go right ahead.
so then her boyfriend, yeah, I wanted him to be, he's a little bit geeky, but you're right, sincere. And he also has sort of a tragic backstory where he sort of reveals that he has night terrors that are so intense that he can't actually spend the night with anybody, because he had an incident
Right.
where he got so scared that he actually attacked her and said, I can't do that again. So he kind of also has to live on his own because he's not convinced that he won't hurt somebody in his sleep. So there are two people who are sort of forced to be on their own.
Wow. Yeah, it's been, I don't know, about a year and a half since I read that book, and I usually tend to read 5 or 6 or 7 books at the same time, just because I sort of have ADD when it comes to reading. And that was one that I actually finished really quick. I would probably say within a month, and I think it usually takes me 4 to 7 months or so to finish a book. It's actually one of only 5 books I recommended last year at the
Oh, cool.
most on BookBub, which is a platform that authors use to advertise
Yeah.
their books. But yeah, it was one that I was just like, I have got to put this out right now. And it's interesting that you mentioned some of that backstory on the night terrors. I totally forgot that Allison had that issue with, you know, intimacy, because yeah,
Yeah.
she said, I can't spend more time with you than just a date for dinner or whatever. It might not be a good idea, and it's really kind of sad when you think of it that way.
Yeah. They're both tragic characters.
Yeah.
Ironically, the book came out just as quarantines were starting. And it was obviously I was not looking into the future saying, for 2020, no one will get to see anybody, but it really tapped into that completely accidentally.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, one of the things that everyone seems to mention to you in interviews, and I've read, I think probably at least 80% of them online in preparation for this interview, was talking about your ability with writing humor in horror stories. And, you've mentioned a lot that a lot of writers do it wrong, that they just point out, just have humor in places that are totally inappropriate for the moment. And, for me, I also write a lot of humor in my books, and it's mostly in those times that there's great tension or stress, and that's something that Dean Koontz talked about in one of his articles or what have you that I've read, that I've kind of taken on. There's all this stuff going on, and I just like pop that like a balloon, and then kind of build it back up, and that's kind of what you mentioned as well. And the one thing I'm curious about is why that you write
Well,
comedy and
lots of
horror.
different part of it is that's how I wanted to start. So I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to be a horror writer someday. I grew up thinking I'm going to be a comedy writer someday.
Hmm.
And so my first published work was a really, really goofy comedy called How to Rescue a Dead Princess. I have another book called Out of Whack. And they're early efforts, trying too hard for sure, because I just wanted, joke, 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 joke. So my early writing was all comedy. And then later I started adding horror to it. And then I kind of started mixing the two.
Okay.
So it would be really difficult for me to ever write something that had no humor in it. I could, if someone said, here's a large sum of money to write a book with no humor, and I could do it easily, actually. But I don't feel any inclination to do it. I just try to not do it incorrectly.
Hmm.
And so it varies from book to book. And Allison is supposed to be a really fun book. It's really dark. It's sad a lot of the time, but it's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to read the book and think, wow, I really enjoyed that. I got my $2.99 worth.
Heck
So it
yeah.
made sense to put lots of humor in it. And so, you know, I want you to like Allison. So she's a funny character, not funny. And it becomes, okay, how funny, how kind of snappy one-liners can someone be if she doesn't get to interact with people? And so I had to scale back from there. She's not in a screwball comedy. She's not doing one-liner after one-liner after one-liner, but she's got a good sense of humor. And so do the villains.
Right.
They're not cracking jokes, but there's a lot of dark humor involved with the villains. And there's really dark humor involved in the situation. I won't have spoilers,
Right.
but as Allison is exploring her powers, there's one scene in particular that is no actual jokes, but as a pitch black comedy, it plays like that. And I won't spoil it at all. But so a lot of the book plays with humor because I wanted it to be just a entertaining fun. It works because it gives you, you like the characters more if they're funny without being obnoxious. And just the premise worked really well for a dark sense of humor. So it's of my books that I consider horror novels, it's one of the funnier ones.
Totally agree. I've only read one actually, and I'm working on my second one. But one of the things I also liked about the book was that Allison and the villain, because you mentioned the villain, I'm not going to say who he is, but he's pretty funny too. But not only that, they seem to have a mutual respect for one another. I thought that
Well,
was really unique in this type of book.
well, they both realize that they're both very dangerous. He
Hmm.
knows that she's not some helpless female that he can just kidnap. He knows that she has these powers that could make her a real problem for him. She knows that he's a dangerous guy because she can't control her powers well enough to just wave her hands and, break his neck. So yeah, there is the mutual, it's mostly based on fear, but yeah, there's a mutual respect between them.
Now, in my writing, sometimes I'll just, for most of the instances that I have, it's not really situational comedy. It's more like you said, a wisecrack here or there. And sometimes I'll find myself just roaring with laughter. I might even start crying because I'm laughing so much. Is that something that happens to you, or am I just nuts?
Laughing at my own work like never happens. Maybe
Never.
if I'm looking at a short story I wrote 20 years ago, I may say, oh, that was kind of funny. But as far as sitting at my computer, just, I'm a comedy genius, it never happens. I don't amuse myself at all while I'm right. Probably because I'm too focused on the technical aspects of,
Hmm.
well, it could be this adjective makes it makes it 0.3% funnier. So that's what I'm going to go with. So yeah, while I'm writing it, I'm not just filled with jolliness and laughter, but because I'm too focused on the technical aspects.
Right.
Every once in a while, I'll go back, if there's a long period between finishing the book and doing the final proofread, I might be amused by something, but it's more of I see what you did there, not a laugh out loud kind of thing.
Hmm. Interesting. So for everybody watching this, listening to it, I'm the crazy one. Yeah,
Or I'm the crazy one. I don't know. We don't know.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting that you had mentioned in a previous interview, and that I tried recently, I would probably say, I think it was late last year, was I wasn't sure how to finish um, a series. I have 4 books in a series, and I wasn't sure how I wanted to finish it. It could go one of 2 ways. I left it open-ended, so I decided, and I couldn't figure it out, so I decided to start another book. Actually, the book after that one, and I started writing that one, finished it, and went back to that ender, that series cap. And I just felt like my mind was going to explode because I have I'm constantly thinking of these 2 books at the same time. You've mentioned in the past that you have actually written more than one book at a time. I'm really curious to see if number one, if you still do that, and what are the upsides and downsides of doing that?
The downside is that it takes longer to finish a book, but where it works really well for me is because I mess with the tones a lot. So if you say to you, what does Jeff Strand write? Why, he writes horror comedy, but there's a wide range of it. And especially my young adult books I've written are just pure comedies. So what will happen is I'll be writing a dark, intense thriller like My Pretties. And then at the same time, I'll be writing a funny young adult book because the young adult books are just trying to cram as many laughs in there as I possibly can.
Hmm.
And what happens is around, 100 pages in, you're like, I wish this book had fewer laughs because, I can't go a single paragraph without either being funny or trying to set something up. And so when I can switch over to My Pretties, which has a lot of humor, but is not a comedy book, where I can just sort of do a more straightforward writing style, it's kind of nice to switch between them. It's good in a book like My Pretties, where the characters are just constantly in deep trouble, where every chapter is, okay, how are they going to get out of this one? Okay, how are they going to get out of this one? Okay, how are they going to get out of this one? If I don't know how they're going to get out of it, it's nice to switch to another book instead of spending the whole day just staring slack-jawed at my
Hmm.
monitor trying to figure it out. So when I have the luxury of working on multiple books, which I don't always, there are times when it's like the deadline is too close. It's like, no, you're working only on this book 18 hours a day. You don't get to do anything fun. Times like that, I don't have the option. I work on one book at a time. But when I have, the luxury of working on multiple things, it's nice to switch between different projects with different tones. But again, it does also, increase the amount of time it takes to finish a book. So
Okay. It was interesting because again, I did read Allison, then I went on to My Pretties, which you just mentioned, and I found that you had the same voice. And what I meant by that is in the writing industry, a lot of agents, editors will say, oh, I want to find a unique writer with a new voice and that sort of thing. And I was really kind of surprised because again, Allison was a fun, like action thrilled book. And My Pretties, like you said, like a totally different tone, very dark, but I could still see your voice. I can still feel your voice in there. And I'm not sure, is that something that has always stayed with you? Have you changed how
I
you've
have
written?
refined it. So if you look at the early stuff, it is trying too hard. The voice is there, but it is, the in your face. I'm going to do everything I can to get a laugh, whether it's appropriate or not. And you see that in the earlier. So it is the same voice. If you read something of mine from, if you pulled an unpublished book from 25 years ago, you'd say, yeah, that's a Jeff Strand book. He just wasn't quite there yet. So the voice has always been there. I actually will, every once in a while take some criticism for it, saying the voice is the same in all his books. Oh, well,
Mm,
people like
yeah.
it. So I don't, make any aggressive effort to not sound, not have my voice show up in different books. But yeah, it's always been there. It's been refined. But yeah, even when I like that you said that, because yeah, when I do a really dark thriller or something that's just a goofy comedy, I do think that you can tell that I wrote it, which is
Mhm.
when I write books that are non-horror, I have a romantic comedy called Kumquat, and I swear that the horror fans would like it if they would give it a chance. Generally, they don't, but if you're a horror fan, if you love stuff like Allison, My Pretties, you'll also enjoy Kumquat. But it's hard to get people to cross over to the non-horror stuff.
Hmm. And that sort of segues into my next question, which is there was an interview again. I'm going back on the back. I'm trying not to like hit the same questions that you've had over
Sure.
and over and over again. So I think let me go back to what I was thinking here on that. Um, I think I'll just jump forward. But what I was mentioning with the tone and the voice, really, I think of something that someone said, which was, when you're writing, you want to be as inobtrusive as possible. I think it was Elmore Leonard who said that, who was a great novelist, great with dialogue, great with pace. And like I said, you do awesome job with pacing, just fantastic. But like Dean Koontz, who's my favorite novelist, my favorite books of his were in the 80s and in the 90s, and he had this I don't know, this great voice that was just purely business, and then he's changed it a couple times since then. And I've often seen a lot of reviewers say, I loved what Kuntz used to do. He's totally different now. He's gone Patterson, James Patterson and so forth. But at the same time, like you said, it's my voice. That's who I am. That's what I do. Sorry. I mean, that's what Stephen King has done. And that's why people have followed him, I think, from writing horror to mystery to like historical he did for a book or two, and just totally different plots, totally different genres. And that's why people stay with him. They like his voice, basically.
Yeah.
So, it's just something out there that, I mean, me personally, I don't think I would change it, but I can totally understand why, you feel the same way, that it's just who you are.
Yeah, I'm not trying to write a Dean Koontz book or a Richard Lehman book. I'm trying to write a Jeff Strand book, and I write it the way I write it.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
I
So Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll
Go
get,
ahead.
Allison got a fairly recent review whining that there was no background description. The characters are thrust into scenes. We don't know even where they are. It's like, so what? That's what I do. I do not put a lot of description in. I don't describe the characters really unless it's essential. And that's, I have a stripped down writing style and people seem to like it. So I
Yeah.
don't feel the need to say, okay, he had brown hair and blue eyes and a hook nose. And I'm not trying to paint a vivid picture. I paint a vivid picture through their personalities and their dialogue. And then you realize, oh, I imagined this character, but it wasn't even described that way in the book. That's just what I got from the way they behave.
Yeah, that's kind of how I do it. I don't give a lot of description. I'll describe a little bit of what, they look like, their physical attributes, but again, you're right. It's all dialogue, it's all what they do and how they do it. And because me, I just don't have any interest. I just don't have any interest in like describing things,
Yeah.
to go
Well,
forth and so
if
forth.
they're in a diner, they're in a diner. I don't need
Yeah,
to, well, I don't need to describe the color of the tables or what the server was wearing because you know what a server wears in a diner and you know what the tables look like. So if if they sat in the booth in a diner is really all you need. I don't need to, unless there's a reason, unless there's a story reason to describe something different where, there was a weird crack in the table and, aside from that, no, they sat in a diner and that's all you need.
yeah.
Tell the
So
story.
yeah. Now you've talked about briefly a little bit ago about, what you have on deadline, what you have going on with this publisher, this one you might be working on your own. Um, I know that you sort of, I mean, you do go into different subgenres of horror. So how do you decide what you want to write and when you want to write it and all that stuff?
Well, a lot of times it starts by choosing a subgenre and, deciding what I want to write tends to be what can I sell because I'm a full-time writer now. And, I wasn't for a long time. I was published for 15 years before I quit my day job. And once I quit my day job, suddenly the success of a book became a lot more important. So it like something like Kumquat, which is a romantic comedy, sold very poorly. I can't keep doing that. I can't have three kumquats in a row, or else I will come crawling back to my day job and say, writing thing didn't work out. So there is very definitely a market um, consideration, not a cynical one. So it's not, what's the latest trend that I can chase? But I know that if I write a horror or thriller, it's going to sell well, as opposed to veering too far from it. And sometimes a book that I would consider horror, but if it still gets a little far from the genre, like Bring Her Back, that's kind of a revenge story.
Yeah.
And it didn't sell as well if I had just said it's a horror novel. So I have to sort of write stuff that I not necessarily every single time I have the wiggle room to say, okay, Autumn Bleeds into Winter sold really well. So I can mess with the next book and do The Writing Life, which was a nonfiction book that I knew would not sell well. I was correct in that assessment, but people really like it. So I kind of wanted to get that book out, but I can't do that multiple times in a row. Then I have to sort of, okay, let's swing back and see what's going to keep, me being able to purchase groceries and pay rent. So but a lot of times the story does start with what subgenre of horror haven't I done yet?
Oh,
And
okay.
so it's, my next book will be called Creep Out, and that's a possessed ventriloquist dummy. And it's like, I was like, I haven't done that. That would be cool. That could be scary. Wonder how many other people have done it. And then a Google search was like, wow, not that many people have done it in book form. Obviously, R.L. Stine did that, but that's aimed at kids. As far as an adult, fully devoted to the possessed ventriloquist dummy, there's not a lot out there. So I thought, okay, that's where I'm going to go. And then I built the story sort of around that, figuring, okay, what twists can I do? Wolf Hunt came from, let's do a wolf hunt, let's do a werewolf book. What can I do that's different from that? Okay, what if I mix it with a crime thriller? Well, you know what, there have been werewolf books that are mixed with crime thrillers. Okay, so what can I do that's different from that? I can add a bunch of humor. And then I sort of built the story around that. So a lot of times it really does come from picking the subgenre first. Sick house, I haven't done a haunted house story, let's what can I do with a haunted house story? And what I sort of did was combine a ghost story with a home invasion story, so that at the halfway point, it goes from haunted house story to home invasion with ghosts, and the tone really changed. It becomes a lot more action packed.
Hmm.
But yeah, it very often starts with the subgenre instead of a story. It's not like I have this amazing story idea. It's okay, what can I do? It's a really uninteresting method of developing a story because it involves just lots of brainstorming. Okay, what can I do with a haunted house? Okay, what could I do with a vampire?
Hmm.
My book Dweller came from the bully who feeds the not the bully, the kid who has a monster to which he feeds bullies. That story's been done before. Okay,
Hmm.
how can I twist that and make it into something new? What if it took place over their entire lives? I've never seen a monster
Hmm.
book that took place over 60 years where it covered their entire life. It's not like
Hmm.
It, which has a long gap between where it sort of bounces back and forth. This covers, at some point, it covers every year in the 60 years. Some of them are just briefly touched on. Some get a lot more attention, but every year from I think 1945 to 2010 is covered in the book Dweller. So I thought that was the twist to the, you know, trope of bullied kid has monster friend that he feeds the bullies to. So I just took that idea, which has been used multiple times, and then put my own spin on it. And so that's a lot of what I do. Is I take the spin. Allison, you know, a girl with telekinetic powers has been done before, but has it been done with this much attention on the action, this much attention on the humor with a middle-aged protagonist? Hopefully not. So it comes from, taking the tropes and then messing with them as much as I can and make them into a quote unquote Jeff Strand novel.
Exactly. Now, that was something that I was going to ask a little bit further on information on, and you did a great job because I was reading through again one of your interviews, and you said you have to read a lot in horror so you know what not to do. And I was actually one who did not read much in horror. I read, the staples I mentioned, Kuntz, King. I've read, some McCammon. All three of those guys are probably all three of my favorites from the 80s and 90s. But I mean, I just started writing a haunted house story and then just kept writing. I've written like 12 or 13 of these haunted house stories, and I'm totally cool with it just because I know those stories sell. But my question to you is, knowing that you're, looking at different subgenres, which is really, you said it's uninteresting, but I actually think it's a really interesting way to go about building a story. Does it does it hurt not to be able to write what you want to write?
A little bit, not in a whiny, I'm a full-time writer, so I'm living the dream. So you're not going to hear me, "Oh, it's just horrible." I wish, like I'm working on a book called Drop the Mic, which is about a stand-up comedian. And I really like the narrative. He's really funny, but he's self-loathing. So he has a really dark and sad sense of humor, like most stand-up comedians do. They're not generally happy people off the stage. And I love the book, and I'm about 10,000 words into it. And I think this will be one of my best books when it's finished, but I know it's not going to sell.
Huh.
It's not going to sell. People will like it, but I know that when I put it out there, it's going to be one of my poor selling books. And so I can't really justify at this point, devoting attention. Every once in a while I come back to it, work on it a little bit, but I can't just say my next book is going to be Drop the Mic, because I know that it's not going to be a strong seller. And because I use my writing to, survive, I have to focus on good sellers. So yeah, there is a minor degree of, gosh, I wish I could write, non-horror stuff a little more often, but it's not a whiny, oh, my life is so hard, because my life is pretty good. The fact that I get to write books, and I love horror. So it's not a case of I wish I could step away from horror forever. It's I wish that I could write non-horror books that would also sell, and the young adult books sell, so I can actually do that. But I wish I could write adult non-horror books that sold, but it's a minor, it's a first world problem. It's not anything that keeps me up at night, because I like writing horror. I love watching horror movies. I love reading horror fiction. So it's a genre that I love. I wish I could veer from it a little more often, but it's not a major problem. No one
But look,
listening to this interview is, oh, I sympathize with his plight. It's like, yeah, shut up. Write
no,
another
and
horror
actually,
book.
no, I think that's awesome that, you're being just honest and like,
Yes.
this is what I have to do to be able to afford to continue to do what I love.
Yep.
So, you are sort of living the dream in that, and you're lucky that horror is a genre that you can just branch off into so many
Well,
different
that's
directions.
that's a big part of it, is that Allison is completely different from My Pretties, which is completely different from Clowns versus Spiders, which is completely different from Pressure. It's not like I'm on the 27th installment of my private investigator series and I'm just like, I am so sick of this. Every book's the same. I can't break free. I can, I have a wide variety. Even in the horror stuff, there's a wide variety of stuff. So I can, I'm not bored at all.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, it really is tremendous when I've looked at, at least the books of yours that I own and just go through on Amazon and just like you said, Clowns versus Spiders. I'm like, where do I even begin to imagine what that might even be like? I have no idea.
Oh, it's great. You should read it.
I'm sure it is if it was written by you. But one of the things you mentioned Dweller. I didn't know the plot behind that. I believe that was one of your four Bram Stoker nominated
Yes.
books, wasn't it?
Yep.
So I think there were was it Blister that was also
No,
nominated?
it was Pressure was nominated for Best Novel. Dweller was nominated for Best Novel. Uh, Gleefully Macabre Tales was up for Best Collection, and A Bad Day for Voodoo was up for Best Young Adult Novel.
In
Zero
Pressure.
wins, zero wins, but two losses to Stephen King, one loss to Peter Straub, and one loss to Jonathan Mayberry. So
So
not
you've
like
got some A-list talent in there amongst
I
yourself.
have
So you
A-list
can't.
talent kicking my ass. So
Yeah, well, yeah, they're what they are, how good they are, and how they've been. So, the way I would see it is if I was in that list, I would just be happy to just be among them, really.
yep.
But you said Pressure. Now, I thought I read on your Facebook that, or on one of your newsletters, that you're coming out with a sequel. Is that right?
Yeah, the sequel is Deathless. It comes out in either probably in September, and it is the long-awaited sequel to Pressure. And I
Because
had,
it's been over a decade, right?
yeah, Pressure, the hardcover limited edition of Pressure, which came out 3 years before the mass paperback, came out in 2006. So yeah, it's been quite a while, and it needed to be quite a while because Pressure takes place over about 20 years. So I wanted Deathless to have the same scope, but if I started Deathless right away, it would have been, 20 years in the future. So I kind of gave it enough time that I can start it. I think Deathless takes place over about 15 years. So I can start it where Pressure left off and then not, have spaceships and laser guns and stuff. So
And a lot of your readers were asking for a sequel, weren't they?
yeah. And
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
not
that's why I thought it
it's not
was.
necessarily a book that lends its, you don't read that and think, oh my God, it's to be continued. It has a pretty definitive ending, but they want to, okay, well, what's happened to our character after all that nightmare is over? And so it wasn't a book like Wolf Hunt where I kind of needed to do a sequel pretty quickly, or the Andrew Mayhem series. So I've done other books that are series. This isn't a series book. It's just, let's pick up 15 years later and find out what's going on with our friend Alex Fletcher. And it was a challenging book to write because, it's like, okay, I need to be really intense because the first book, Wolf Hunt is fun and entertaining. Like I can do Wolf Hunt 2 and I can do Wolf Hunt 3. I just need to make it just as entertaining, just as much fun. Pressure was dark and intense. It was like, okay, so how do I top that? How do I top a book that people consider, one of my most frightening books? So it was tough to come up with the story and to, basically top it. And so far, the early reactions have been, yeah, it's just as good as Pressure. Now, whether the world will see it that way, we'll find out. But the early reactions have been really good. So I'm
Great.
optimistic.
I'm glad. I'm hoping those readers of yours that have been waiting for it are, excited about that, I
Yeah.
guess you can say. And I did mention that your Facebook and newsletter. Um, I've got to say, I know you have like short stories in each of your newsletters, and you
Mhm.
often put those on Facebook. I've got to tell you, I found myself laughing out loud to just some of those as well. Um,
Mhm.
if you're watching this or listening to this podcast, I really encourage you to check out Jeff's Facebook. also sign up for his newsletter, just because he'll have some weird stuff in there that is fun, and some interviews, and he'll have a whole bunch of things. But again, it's funny, and I mean, there's one about death showing up at a man's door and what happens. It's very short, but it was really, again, it was really funny. So
Yeah,
totally
I
encourage you to do that. Couple more things before we sign off. One of the things that I've seen a lot on your social media or in past newsletters was, books that have been in development for film. And it seems like every time you like mention it, it's like, well, something dropped off, but there might be something coming up the pike soon with this. I can't mention anything. Is anything in development now?
oh, there's all kinds of stuff in development. I have huge news, which I actually kind of thought I would have before this podcast, but I don't yet. But
Okay.
there is a crazy big announcement that will be forthcoming soon. So there's lots of stuff going on. There's some stuff that I am allowed to talk about. Like I wrote the script for an adaptation of my YA novel, The Greatest Zombie Movie Ever. And then I also adapted my novella Cutter for a company called Binge Brothers. And
Okay.
so that they have allowed, there's no gag order there. I can talk about that all I want. But most of the stuff is don't say anything. It's like, come on, but I want to say it. It's cool. Nope, don't say anything. So yeah, there's stuff going on with several of them. Ranges. Some of it's fairly small, some of it's gigantic, and you'll just go, what? When I'm finally allowed to announce it. But there's the book stuff. Generally, I just say, hey, I'm working on this book, and I'm allowed to talk about it. And with the movie stuff, I don't get to choose what I share and what I don't share. So
Right.
yeah, there's stuff going on, but it's all this maddening, where I can't talk about it.
You're in a gag order over there, like, oh, I want
Yeah.
to tell everybody because it's going to be so awesome, and you have to wait like probably months and months to figure out when the right time is.
Yeah.
Um, I know that when you have a book in or a story in development, I think it's sort of like you give them a lease, a certain amount of
Yep.
time, whether it's years, 3, 4 years, and if they don't make it, then the rights revert back to you.
Mhm.
I think you mentioned that that's actually happened more than once on the same book, isn't that right?
Yeah. I've got several options that are active, and yeah, it's like a lease. You will give you a very small amount of money, and then for the next, as little as a year, as much as 3 years,
Okay.
we're the only people who can buy it.
Hmm.
So if Steven Spielberg calls me up and says, hey, I want to buy the movie rights, and it's already optioned, like, sorry, Steve, can't help you there.
Yeah.
So it's basically you're giving them the exclusive rights to buy the book while they try to raise the money or get the cast together and get the movie made.
Okay.
But once that expires, they generally have the option to, and it's specified in the original contract, to renew. And usually they
Oh,
do.
okay.
So then they say, okay, it's been 18 months. Now we have to pay you again. And sometimes it goes up and sometimes it doesn't. And then we get another 18 months but then sometimes it expires and they just say, okay, we weren't able to get it done, or we don't want to pay you any more money. And then it's yours again. And then you can option it out to someone else. And so my book Pressure, I have done that a couple of times. But
Okay. Yeah, I know in reading from a lot of authors, mostly interviews, they would often say, I think John Grisham was one of the big ones that I first heard this from, where they'd always ask him, what do you think of, the book or the movie, I should say? They sort of made it really different. They changed a lot of plot points, characters, different character names, everything like that. What do you think? And he's like, I really don't care. I mean, I have the book already. If you want to read it, there it is. This is another person's interpretation. So they're totally different. What's your take on that?
I care to some degree. My first priority is, will the check clear? So because you get paid a lot more for selling movie rights than you get paid for writing books, at least at my level.
Yeah.
However, as lots of writers have been, catapulted into the big leagues because a really good movie version was done.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so, I wrote the script for Greatest Zombie Movie Ever and Cutter. So if those got made, it would be my name, screenplay by Jeff Strand. So that's also a good thing. So I do care about the end result, because John Grisham was famous pretty much from his first book. So what, he was doing fine before the movie adaptations came out. This would be huge for me to have a really good movie version. So I'm not like, I don't care. I don't care as much as I care about the quality of the book. So if it's a bad one, it's like, oh, my life is over. It'll be disappointing. But the book, hopefully the book won't suck as much as a bad movie adaptation. But
yeah,
my priority right now is, the contracted payment amount, thinking, oh, that would be nice. Because as a, full-time writer who is solidly mid-list, not a New York Times bestseller by any stretch of the imagination, the movie money would be sweet. So
yeah. Well, I'm a couple notches below you, so hopefully I'll at some point get to your point. But gosh, what was I going to go into your next? You've just recently released a new book with 3 other authors called Slice
yes,
and Dice.
Slice
So
and
it's about
Dice. Yes,
slice and dice, right?
right. It's 4 slasher novellas. So it's me, it's William Malmborg, it's Iain Rob Wright, and Jeff Menapace, and we each did a slasher themed novella. So
So,
mine is called 20th Anniversary Screening, and it's a pseudo nonfiction piece about a terrible slasher flick called The Roofer, and what happened on its original release and what happened when they made the unwise decision to have a 20th anniversary screening of it at the same theater. So
it looks really good. I haven't picked it up yet. I'm sure I'll get it soon. You mentioned that you love talking horror, you love talking about books. What are some of the good movies that you've seen in the last since lockdown?
I actually haven't seen a lot of movies since lockdown. I am a theater guy, and so not being able to go to the movies has been miserable. Like the first thing I saw upon my return to the cinema was Spiral, the Saw movie,
Oh,
which
what
was
did you think?
good. I thought it was pretty
Yeah.
good. I haven't actually followed the Saw series very much,
Mhm.
but I was like, I'm going back to the movies, so I saw Spiral. Um, I think probably the best thing I've seen on streaming was Anything But Jackson, which is on Shudder, and which is
Huh.
fantastic. But mostly my Shudder queue is really full of stuff I want to watch, but I generally don't have that much time to sit down for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So a lot of what I watch is TV where I can break it up, where it's like, okay, I can watch this for 20 minutes during lunch or 20 minutes before bed. I don't like to break up movies. I like to watch movies beginning to end.
Yeah.
So I don't watch as many movies as I do, TV shows. And of course, in 2021, TV shows are as good as movies ever were. There's a lot of
Right.
amazing stuff. So when we started watching Justified, that took up the next 4 months
Months.
of my
Yeah.
viewing time. So I watch a lot more serialized TV than I do movies because I haven't been in theaters and I am a theater
Yeah.
going guy. But if you ask me this question in a year from now, I'll have a lot better answers.
We'll maybe have to do that.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff Strand, thank you so much for visiting us. It's been eye-opening some of the things you've shared with me. I'm going to have to go over it again just because you had some really good insight. Congratulations on your new book being released. I'm looking
Thank you.
forward to, and I think so many other horror fans will be looking forward to that movie announcement that you have coming up soon.
Soon, hopefully.
But yeah, so stay tuned to his Facebook posts. Get on his newsletter. You'll get that information first. But thank you again, sir, for visiting. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.